Scott Ritter has been to Russia. In fact, he's going to be going to Russia again soon, pretty soon. Danny Haifong was just recently in China. I'll be talking to Danny tomorrow night about his visit to China. And everyone that I've spoken to that's either been to China or Russia, Tara Reid's living in Russia, completely opposite observation compared to what Western media tells you about Russia. From what I've heard from people who've actually been to Russia, they said it's a beautiful country. They talked about how clean certain, parts of Russia are compared to the United States. Danny Haifong talked about that too when he got back from China, just how clean it is. This is true though. If you guys like travel, especially if you go to some of the like European countries, some of the countries, it's like, I'm talking no trash on the street. Like no littering, no. I heard Japan is like that as well. So it makes you wonder, what is it about these countries that the West finds to be so threatening? Like, why wouldn't you promote that type of lifestyle to have people take care of the streets, take care of the environment, subways that actually work? I live in a state where the subway system is a mess. In the Boston area, or you have the New York subway, which is completely. It runs like 24 hours, but it's also very dirty and nasty too. And it's like, and you'll go to other countries and you'll see like their subway system and you're like, why don't we have this here? My dad was stationed in South Korea many years ago. My dad said South Korea is just like, it's just so clean and beautiful. And again, it's just like, our infrastructure in this country is terrible when you compare it to some of the other countries that our government tends to demonize. And it makes you wonder, Garland, what did we do wrong economically when we're trying to build up our infrastructure in this country? When you look at other countries like China and even like South Korea, what did they do right? And where did we go wrong?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Number one, we haven't built infrastructure in a long time in this country. What was the 50s, the 60s? A lot of our infrastructure was built 40s, 50s, 60s, stuff like that. And we stopped in the 70s. Why is that? Here's my argument. It wasn't built for us. They don't do stuff like that for us. See, we had industry then. And the titans of industry, the people who own these big things, they needed railroads to move their stuff. They needed roads to move their stuff. They needed a good electrical grid so that they could power their factories. They needed good workers. So you needed schools so they could educate the workers. So when we had all of these factories here, the United States invested in infrastructure so that the infrastructure that was necessary for the people that own these factories was there so they could make money, right? Once the factories closed and went overseas, they ain't building that stuff for us. They only built it for the billionaires. So now they're like, we're like, hey, we want infrastructure. They're like, you don't look like a billionaire to me. You ain't getting no infrastructure. Perhaps you don't understand how this system works. We ain't building Nathan for you. Look around at the schools, and they were all built in the 1950s and 60s. So they could have good, well-educated people to go work in the General Electric and a Kodak factory. Well, they're all closed and go overboard. So you don't need a good education to work at the local mini mart or to ask somebody, would you like to supersize this, ma'am? So they ain't doing it because it's not necessary. They don't do that for us. We get no infrastructure. We get nothing. And I might add this. Part of what you just said answers your own question. Think about this. You go to other countries and they'll say, join the military to defend your country. You join the military, you might be in a base in this part of the country and that part of the country, right? What do they say in the US? Join the military to see the world. What the hell are you seeing the world for? Unless you're an empire. There's any other country that says, join the military and you can fly all over the world. You can live anywhere in the world. Oh, we'll go from this part of the world to the other. Why is it that we don't see Venezuela having a base all over the world? Russia and China, you can't see the world if you join their military, but you can see the world if you join ours. Why? Because we're trying to dominate the world and we got bases from one end of this world to the other, right? And so right now, if I had 4 houses, they'd all be falling apart. They'd all be going to pieces. They'd all be falling apart because it'd be so expensive for me to maintain those 4 houses, right? But if you got one, you can take care of that one pretty good. So we got to pay for bases all over the place. We're building new bases. We got to bribe people. Tony Blinken just said the other day in some country, I don't even know what the hell, Moldova, we're going to give them $125 million, literally $125 million to combat Russian disinformation. How about $125 million for East Baltimore? Nah, they ain't getting it. And that ain't for nothing about Russian disinformation. That money, the big guy will get his 10%. And that money will get peeled off with corruption. So they take all this money, they build bases, they send it all over the world for imperialism. And while they're doing it, they all peel out their little piece and fill their filthy, stinking pockets. So therefore, and when it's all done, and when they end up, emptying the piggy bank, ain't nothing left for home. And they don't care. These companies that went around the world, like United Fruit Company, and preyed on, Ethiopia for their coffee, or Guatemala or for their cocoa, or whatever the case may be, right? They went around the world and they preyed on everybody else, and now it's harder for them to prey on everybody else. So those same monsters that we created are now home. And they're preying on us. That's what student loans and all that stuff is about. So now they're just preying on whoever they can prey on. And the same monsters that we let loose on the world came back home, and they're preying on the people here.
Yeah. That's another thing too. You mentioned Moldova, and I'll pass it to you real quick, JB. Moldova, why are we giving money to countries that have a lot of corruption, like Ukraine and Moldova? And I first heard about Moldova a couple years ago, actually. It was on 90 Day Fiance. There was a guy from Moldova, and he was telling his, soon to be wife, he said, when you come to my country, just FYI, you have to know that there's a lot of corruption in Moldova. And so you're going to hear things about me that may alarm you, but it's what I did, like taking bribes and things like that. He said, you have to understand, in my country, that wasn't unusual. So again, though, here's the US government giving all this money to countries that have a lot of corruption, like Moldova and Ukraine.
I think you just answered your own question. Why do we choose? Why would the most corrupt country on earth, the United States, choose other corrupt countries? Why? Ukraine is perfect. They can go there. They can send Hunter Biden in there. All of these crooks can go in there, and they can fill their stinking pockets, and nobody can trace the money, right? So they go to a corrupt country, and basically they take billions of dollars from the United States. They pump it into that corrupt country, and then they launder it all over the place through shell companies into their pockets. So corrupt countries are perfect for. It would be harder to launder the money here and divvy it up. So they take it to a corrupt country, they control everything, and then they divvy the money up in their own pockets. That's what that's the reason they choose corrupt countries. And if the country ain't corrupt when they get there, it'll be corrupt when they get finished with it, because that's the plan. It's let's take these corrupt countries or make them corrupt, and we'll all eat.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to add to your point, especially in regards to how the United States only invests in the interest of billionaires. I remember Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about the reason for the the interstate highway system wasn't really for consumers to be able to get around, but really for the military to be able to traverse the entirety of the United States more easily versus having to go down, different side roads. So really it was a military reason. And so every single time we have an advancement is for something that was done for the military, and then, okay, you consumers, you guys can have a little bit too. And so it's always really, the military industrial complex always gets the biggest slice of the pie first, and then whatever crumbs that fall off the table is really given to the rest of us. Is that the same? You share the same sentiment there?
Yeah, it's the ruling elite. They feel like they got a right to it. It's theirs. And if they should, by their graces, decide, they don't even share a crumb with us. While they're eating, if a crumb happens to fall off the table on the floor and we are able to scamper over and eat it, okay, that's good enough. Because that's exactly what you're saying. We're going to build this for ourselves. And if y'all can drive on it or whatever, go, okay, fine, you can drive it. And if you benefit from it, all right, whatever, who cares? But this is all for ourselves. It's exactly what you're saying. They do all this stuff for themselves. And if we happen to benefit from it, then they act like they've done us some great favor. But now what's coming down to the reality is the whole game is falling apart. It's being exposed. And the worst thing about it to them really is Gaza. because they've been able to argue that we're out here doing liberal interventionism. We're going around the world doing good things, and we're bringing you back, and you're benefiting. Think about this. You're getting cheap this and cheap that, and you're living well and better than others, blah, 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 right? And so they could kind of bribe the working class by saying, you're living better than the working class in other countries, aren't you? Yeah, well, then shut your mouth and don't ask how we got this money. You know, it's kind of like the mafia husband, who the wife knows he's in the mafia, but she keeps her mouth closed because she's living pretty good. You know what I mean? Or whatever. The girl who knows her boyfriend's a drug dealer, but she keeps her mouth shut because she gets a lot. You know what I mean? Those kinds of things, right? There's a bribe in it. The working class. A lot of people in the working class knew, Annie, what we're doing overseas ain't all that great, but I'm living pretty good. I got 2 hots in a cot. I'll keep my mouth shut, right? Well, now, with Gaza, people are seeing how the sausage is made. You know, one of the ways I put it, and, you know, forgive me if you've heard this before, and it is traditionally the left, the Bernie Sanders left, say it was, the corporate left. What they would try to teach us is this. At the end, this is what your job is as a left in the United States. You're a leftist in the United States. This is what you're supposed to do. At the end of the year, the government has a pie of $2 trillion. And your job as a lefty in the United States is to say, my job is to make sure that the working class gets as much of that pie as I can. If it's only a quarter of the pie, if it's only a third of the pie, my job as a leftist is to look at that, say, I'm just giving a number, $2 trillion budget that the US has, $2 trillion pie. My job as a leftist in the United States is to ensure the working class and the poor gets as big a part of that pie as possible. But we always have to ignore all the black and brown and red bodies that are baked into the pie. You see, we can't talk about that pie came because we killed all these people in this country, because we overthrew the people in the government of Costa Rica so we could get those cheap bananas. So we overthrew this government. We executed, we assassinated this leader. Mum's the word. Don't talk about all the black and brown bodies in the pie. The only thing you talk about as a leftist in the United States is, how do we make sure the working class, the working poor, and the poor get as big a slice of pie as possible? What Gaza has done has slammed the door on that. Now people are looking at it like, holy crap, that's how the pie is baked. And they don't like what they see. They can no longer ignore that what the United States is doing is going around the world doing horrible, unthinkable, genocidal things. And in the end, they're like, yeah, but you got cheap oil, didn't you? Yeah, we may have to kill a few people in the region, but we kept the price of oil down, didn't we? People are like, yeah, but I can't do that no more. This is right in front of my face and it's too big. And they're not going to be able to close that door. So now the so-called leftists in the United States have to get away from that argument of we have to argue about make sure we get our fair share of a pie that was baked with death and murder and theft and corruption, to addressing how and why that pie was baked and the fact that we had a part in baking it. And now that's where we are right now. And that is a chasm between the ruling elite and the working class that cannot be closed. And the ruling elite understand that because they're coming out with an iron fist. They're saying, well, we understand, so we're going to have to slam these students. We're going to have to slam anybody who we're going to have to. So now they are, the other thing is this, it's exposing them. It's exposing the ruling elite. The reality that is as brutal as they are around the world, as decadent and malicious as they are around the world, that if challenged at home, they're the same way. And that's being demonstrated also. And so this is an interesting time for the empire because the ruling elite are completely divorced, completely separated from the people. And we're seeing how that's going to work out. I don't know, but we're talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, absolutely. And this was an amazing conversation. So many great points. And one of the things that you said, and I just want to say this last thing, is it's like a kid getting a pair of Nikes, but you find out that your parent actually had to take a couple people out just to get those Nikes.
Exactly.
It's like we had to roll over a few poor people just to get those Nikes. Yeah, they're 6 feet under now, but at least you got your Nikes now.
Yeah, and people, you know, it's funny you mentioned that. I'll say this, and the other thing people are waking up to realize is this. Look, it was like, oh no, these Nikes were built in a sweatshop. Remember that? Darn those sweatshops, right? Well, the reality about sweatshop is what? The United States and the West, that's what they had here. This was the sweatshops was here. They had little child labor, all these terrible things, right? And what happened? Unions came up and made them stop doing that. Unions came up and said, nah, we can't be sweatshops anymore. You got to have safe working conditions. You got to have, you know, no child labor. You got to give people some days off, blah, blah, blah. All they did was took the industrial dynamics that they had here when the regulations came up as a result of the unions and they couldn't do it anymore. They just moved it over to Bangladesh, Bangkok, wherever the hell, right? Moved it over there. And we call it a sweatshop. It's exactly what they're doing here. They simply ran away from the regulations, and now they're doing to the people in Bangladesh or whatever the heck what they were doing here if they just moved it. That's all, nothing more.
Yep, absolutely. Any final words on this topic, Sebs?
I will say this. In reference to the Nike thing, I was going to say that's a JB analogy.
Wonderful. And, you know, I'll end up by saying this. You know, one of the really enlightening things that happened to me was when I got an opportunity to go to Venezuela, and I went when the sanctions were really bad, right? And I was able to travel around the country to talk to people, what have you. And then when I left, I'm like, it's nothing like I was told. You know what I mean? I was told that, oh, Maduro's a evil dictator. And when I talked to the people, all the poor folks loved him. And they all talked about Chavez. And they all were diehard Bolivarian socialists. And they shook their little woman. I'll never forget, I was way out in the mountains. And this little woman said, you tell the Americans when you get back, we will fight for our democracy and blah, blah, blah. And these people were diehards. They were happy. I've never seen so many volunteers in my life. I didn't realize that. They had like all these volunteer organizations, volunteer to help the community here, volunteers to do this, volunteers to help the seniors, volunteer to help the poor, blah, blah. It was a society where the government was building. They didn't have much money because U.S. sanctions, and they were building free homes for people, putting people into free homes and all of these things. And I'm like, well, hell, no wonder they don't want us to come here. Because people will come here and say, I've been lied to, and can I get some of that?